Ave Maria, the following program discusses adult themes. Viewer discretion is advised.
His work on EWTN and other places, but he is really here, in my mind, because of his affection for his work with Father Harvey, going almost to the back to the beginning of the apostolate. And so he brings with him, of course, a wonderful Christian anthropology, all of the clinical experience, which is so important to the work of courage, and he brings with him, too, that affection for Father Harvey, as, of course, Father Groeschel also, and Cardinal Burke, who knew him from many, many years ago, bring to us today. And this is part of our desire in this conference, was to honor the memory of our founding director, our founding father, and that's one of the reasons why we've asked Dr. Fitzgibbons to speak. Dr. Fitzgibbons.
Thank you. Pleasure being here with you this morning. Speaking after Saint Father Groeschel, reminds me of so many conferences in which I would speak after Saint Father John Harvey. And I carry his card with me and say a little prayer to him every day. It's a great pleasure being here with you and the Courage meetings. One comes here somewhat drained in the battle and finds oneself energized and strengthened. One of my favorite passages from the Old Testament, a brother strengthened by a brother or sister is like a fortified city. So it's very strengthening to be here. While the topic I've chosen is mastery and self-giving, self-mastery, which comes from John Paul II, who stated that self-mastery is essential to self-giving. And he wrote in Faith and Reason, "It is in faithful self-giving that a person finds a fullness of certainty and security." So when we give ourselves, we image in the sacrament of marriage, we image God, and in some ways, John Paul II writes, and we even become an icon of the Trinitarian love, the flow of love between a husband and a wife. I'd like to begin this talk by just saying a brief part of St. Augustine's prayer to the Holy Spirit. "Breathe in me, O Holy Spirit, that all my thoughts may be holy." So I would like to talk initially about my relationship with Father John Harvey, truly an extraordinary man. I first met him in 1979. For me, he was an incredible spiritual father, a mentor, a remarkable instrument that God chose to bring in to the midst of extraordinary darkness. Dale O'Leary, who's a major writer which had been the Vatican delegation at Beijing and Cairo and with the Catholic Medical Association, stated one day that church historians may go back upon this history and view it as the history of the great sexual heresy within the church. The great complicity in this heresy about Christ's true teachings on sexual morality. So in 1979, I met Father Harvey for the first time. And I was 3 years out of my training in psychiatry. And the vicar for clergy in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, then Monsignor Galante, now Bishop Galante of Camden, would have monthly meetings for mental health professionals. And somehow in those meetings, I may have brought up that I'd been seeing some males with homosexuality, certainly not my particular specialty. Most of my work involves, with men, involves issues surrounding male confidence. That is, in most of the problems with men with anxiety, substance abuse, depression, pornography use relates to male confidence issues, which is the primary problem numerous studies have demonstrated in the homosexual lifestyle. Large studies, 7,000 adults in the Netherlands, 10,000 teenagers in England this year. So at that meeting, I met him for the first time and was extremely impressed. This gentle, quiet man who just proclaimed the truth, gently, quietly. I was, in 1979, totally naive about what was going on. I was in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. It was led by John Cardinal Kroll. We were protected. I mean, we were really protected. If someone stepped out of line, paternal correction, goodbye. You know, there was no problem. It's like in a family. Like I have three daughters, and the most common thing I correct in my daughters is the most common thing I correct in my patients. Selfishness. Selfishness is the major enemy of marital love. It is the major reason why priests have left the priesthood over the past 40 years. It is the core reason why priests sexually abused adolescent males. Selfishness. Acting against one's very nature as a man, to be a protector, and one's anointing as a priest, to be ontologically conformed to Jesus Christ. So with Father Harvey, I then began having a wonderful opportunity to talk to him, to turn to him, to call him regularly. Father, I got a challenging person I want to run by you. He would reciprocate. We would share different histories and about people we're trying to help. In 1995, we gave a conferences, 2 one-day conferences for the priests of Allentown, Pennsylvania. They were required to attend. The priest called it Gay Day. And he spoke about the church's teaching, and I spoke about the origins of homosexuality and approaches to healing. And we would go back and forth in this area and supporting one another. In about 1987, 89, it became clear to me, my eyes were opened slowly to what was occurring in the church. It was occurring particularly in the treatment centers for priests and religious. That is, the priests and religious who went to these treatment centers were by and large told, God made you that way, try to live with it, plus minus. So I thought, well, we have Father Harvey here with tremendous wisdom. Let's propose a treatment program within a program called the Father John Harvey Treatment Program for Sexual Addictions. We'll put that into the treatment program for priests in the treatment center outside Philadelphia. And so we met with the director of the program several times, and of course the idea was rejected. However, in Philadelphia, we are now dancing in the streets because we have a new archbishop, Archbishop Chaput. And it occurred to me yesterday during these meetings, I'm going to send Archbishop Chaput an email. He responds to emails in unbelievably record time. He was installed in Philadelphia on Tuesday. The announcement was made on a Tuesday. Tuesday night, I was sitting, I'd only met him once in the past, very briefly. I thought, well, let me send him a congratulatory message. So I sent him an email. Your Excellency, we are delighted that the Lord has chosen you to be our Archbishop. Totally delighted. And be assured of the prayers of myself, my wife, and our 3 daughters. That was sent at 9 o'clock. At 9:05. Dear Adele, Rick, Lily, Elise, and Treese, thank you so much for welcoming me. Keep praying! Exclamation points. So I'm going to take this idea of Father Harvey's that we had earlier to improve the treatment centers and take it to Archbishop Chaput in the future. When he was writing, one day he said to me, Rick, I'm going to be writing a book on homosexuality, a new book. And he said, I'm looking for a place to live while I write that book. Do you have any ideas? So I had a good friend who ran an addiction treatment center outside Philadelphia, Joe Driscoll. The Malvern Institute and said, Joe, Father Harvey's looking for a place to live while he writes his book on homosexuality, his second book. So Joe said, well, Rick, I have a room way up in the 3rd floor where the roof slants down. It's a little room with a bed, and let's show it to him. So we took Father Harvey out there one day, showed it to him. He said, it's a deal. So he spent many months living in this addiction treatment center, having breakfast and lunch and dinner with those in their recovery programs, and he wrote the book, The Truth About Homosexuality. He was I loved his meekness and his humility, truly modeled after the Lord and St. Francis de Sales. And he said to me one day, Rick, what do you think I should title the second book? Do you have any ideas for the second book? And I was not a person given to correcting people that much at that point in my life, but I had to be honest with him. I said, well, Father, I have to be honest with you. The title of your first book was very unfortunate. There's no such thing as a homosexual person. The title would have been much better, would have been Persons with Same-Sex Attractions. So he said, what do you think about the second book? And I said, well, truth. There's truth in this area. Everyone thinks there isn't truth. There is truth in this area. We need to know the truth. And so he happened to choose that title. For me, when my eyes became more open, and I saw, we have this problem. This is not just a problem in my office with a few people. This is a problem in the church, in the culture, beyond anything I could ever imagine. And so when I feel partially burned out, I would call him regularly. He'd be my spiritual director therapist. Hang in there, Rick. Don't be discouraged. God will triumph in this. Oftentimes when I'd be calling him, he would have, at this time of the year, it was the evening, the Philadelphia Phillies game he'd have on the radio. So he was always multitasking. So when my wife criticizes me for multitasking, I said, "Dear Father John Harvey, remember." When the crisis in the church hit and the post-crisis programs were developed, they were done with an attempt to deliberately cover up the role of homosexuality in the crisis in the church. So that in the Virtus programs, probably many of you took the Virtus programs, there were 4 myths taught about the crisis in the church. And the third myth was that homosexuality played a role in the crisis. Father Harvey, I can't believe it. Calm down, Rick. Keep trusting the Lord. Keep persevering and trusting God. And I have to tell you that with further events here, for example, the recent John Jay Criminal College report, I miss him. I miss Father Harvey. But the good thing is I know we can turn to him and pray to him, and I know his prayers are heard. Because in February, I had an opportunity, so an example that I know he was interceding. God called him in December. In February, I had an opportunity to speak to 130 bishops on the role of homosexuality in the crisis in the church. In many parts of this country, I'm not viewed very favorably because many priests come to us falsely accused. Many priests come to us falsely accused. And oftentimes they're falsely accused, they're loyal, they're faithful, and they're falsely accused by those in the church who are not loyal and who are not faithful. And so, at any rate, this opportunity to speak to 130 bishops I decided to speak to them, my topic yesterday, same-sex attractions in youth, and their right to informed consent. That is, the right of youth to know the truth about the body of knowledge, the extensive body of knowledge on homosexuality. That body of knowledge we in the Catholic Medical Association have put into a brochure, Homosexuality and Hope. You can obtain that pamphlet at our website, cathmed.org. That's C-A-T-H-M-E-D, cathmed.org. So with these bishops, I presented them the issues about causes, serious male confidence problems in those who had lacked eye-hand coordination, distant father relationships, poor body image, etc., and said we treat in our practice about 5 or 6 seminarians, different parts of the country with transitory same-sex attractions. These problems will be addressed and healed because there's a spiritual component to the program so they can move ahead to ordination. And I said, oh, by the way, those priests involved in the crisis in the church, all of them had severe problems. They were severely psychologically disordered. This had nothing to do with availability. It had to do with individuals who were severely disordered, highly narcissistic, to act against their very nature as men. As men, we want to protect adolescent males. We want to form their character, to strengthen them as young men, not use them. So it's this total giving in to narcissism, etc. An archbishop from the Midwest, after I spoke, stood up, Archbishop Naumann. He said, oh, Dr. Fitzgibbons, you may not realize this, but what you've said deviates completely from the preliminary reports of the John Jay Criminal College. Please explain the difference. I said, thank you, Father Harvey. Oh, okay. So I know Father John helped me with that. I said, well, first of all, criminologists have absolutely no professional training and to understand complex sexual behavior between an adult and a child. So they should have recused themselves. Secondly, those who asked for the study should have consulted with mental health professionals, with academically appointed who are above PC, a number of them, who would have said, you can't go there. Criminologists can't tell you causes of behavior like this. Secondly, if you're an employee of the State University of the System of New York and you make a comment critical of homosexuality, what happens to your tenure? I said to the bishops, you have in your possession a handout from the Catholic Medical Association, Homosexuality and Hope. I said, I co-authored that. And I also co-authored a textbook on anger for the American Psychological Association books, which is my real specialty. And my colleague at the University of Wisconsin, Bob Enright, said to me, Rick, if you had a faculty appointment in a Department of Psychiatry, co-authoring that pamphlet for the CMA would probably have cost you your tenure. Even though, what did we quote? We quoted all the research that shows that if you love somebody, you want to tell them the truth about the homosexual lifestyle. You love them, yes, but you tell them the truth. For example, in May, in the journal Cancer, the study was published at Boston University, that they did this big study of the health of men in California. And they discovered, wait a minute here, they've broken it down into sexual orientation. And so what did they find in this study? So what was the median age of onset of cancer in men in the homosexual lifestyle? Any guesses? Age 41. Age 41. Twice as much cancer. Then looking at the psychiatric morbidity, the studies on psychiatric morbidity are just off the charts. So I made these points to the bishops, and so about 2 archbishops came out and said, the John Jay Criminal College has told us this is caused by availability. Since then, I have not seen any archbishops come out and make that comment, or bishops make that comment. In communicating, we have this month published a very lengthy article in our Catholic Medical Association journal, severely critiquing the John Jay Criminal College report. If you want a copy of that, you can go to our website, maritalhealing.com. That's maritalhealing.com, where we also have posted the webinar that I gave to those bishops in Dallas. So Father Harvey was tremendous in helping one feel supported and strengthened. Even though he's not here with us, I believe very much that he's helping in terms of the battle now we face in marriage. The total attack upon all that is sacred in this culture, the unborn life, the elderly, and now the great sacrament of marriage. And so praying to him that the truth can come out there. We need his help in this one major area. That in the courts, there's a need for academic psychologists to testify about the truth in the literature. Most will not testify. Why won't they testify? They're afraid to testify. So there's one colleague I have who's now working to go ahead and testify. He said to me yesterday on the phone, I can't believe it. He was in Washington, the APA, filming for a new book that he's written. It's being published by the APA. And so when I was down there, Rick, I heard that they voted in regard to same-sex marriage 159-0 in favor of it. And I said, Bob, if they knew the literature, if they really were psychologists who cared about people, they would never do that. You wouldn't want, understand that what goes on in the homosexual lifestyle, the lack of loyalty, the lack of fidelity, the profound narcissism, using people, that there's no loyalty, there's no fidelity. Even these so-called marriages, there's no longevity to them. And so what you have, because of the lack of loyalty, lack of fidelity, you have significant depressive illness, you have high substance abuse, you have high levels of depression, anxiety, etc. So, not to be positive, courage has been a great gift to my professional life, my work, just being enriched being here. Some of our patients are so strengthened by participating in courage. The meetings, I think, are tremendous. I'm going to offer some suggestions later, just to consider a thought about your meetings. Because it's very clear in the young mental health field, when you look at what's the trauma people have, it usually arises from one of 4 emotional sources, and then 1 major personality disorder. Problem attaching to your father, problem attaching to your mother, problem attaching to siblings, and problems attaching to peers. And when you uncover those weaknesses, and many young people don't want to admit they have them, of course, but when you uncover them, then you can move in on the anger, help people forgive, remove the capsule of anger that surrounds sadness. But then you have the loneliness for a father, the loneliness for a mother who wasn't controlling, and the loneliness for a male friend, the loneliness for girlfriends or a brother who loved you. And in the Catholic faith, we've been given such a richness in our gifts that one could bring in St. Joseph as father into that wound, Our Lady as mother, and especially the Lord as friend and brother. Most of the males we work with in regard to homosexuality, their trauma is with their peers. Their trauma is from being rejected in the male world by their male peers more than by their fathers. I mean, very few of my male friends had close father relationships. None of them have same-sex attractions. But why not? It's because most of them had great bonding with male peers through sports. They had great bonding through sports. They've never had same-sex attractions. So it's more than having a father who's distant. That can be a factor. But peer relationships, in many ways, are more important. I've had adolescents and college students in my office, and they've never review the history, and they reveal this horrendous treatment by their peers, beginning in elementary school. And I've said to some of them, have you ever told your mother and your father about this? And the answer is no. I've never told them. Well, why haven't you told them? I'm too ashamed to tell them. It was something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with my personhood, and I can't tell them what happened to me. Before I go on, one other thing I want to share with Father John Harvey was this. The transitioning of leadership of courage from Father John Harvey to Father Paul Chek was an enormous challenge. And Father John Harvey was treated in ways that were horrendous. And thank God, finally, for Archbishop Dolan. We had written him, he and I, the board had approved Father Harvey, but there were major obstructionists stopping the appointment of Father Paul Chek. And we wrote him, Archbishop Dolan, one letter, Father Harvey and I, and we're on the membership board. It has to approve the board's decision for Father Chek. And so Archbishop Dolan wrote a letter, and then finally people fell into line, and the leadership could be transitioned. But during that time, I was saying to my wife, I couldn't take that. If that happened to me, what was done to him was done to me. I couldn't have tolerated that. And I began reading about St. Francis de Sales, and I recognized his meekness, his incredible meekness, enabled him to trust God through that, to rely on God, that God created courage, and that God would support courage. It's a new tremendous leadership we have now with Father Paul Scalia, and the great influence also of Father Paul Chek. I told Father Harvey another issue we talked about that hopefully will come to the fore again. I mentioned earlier the post-crisis programs in the church. The post-crisis programs in the church should have addressed the issue. If you are a Roman Catholic priest, if you are an adult male, and you have attractions to an adolescent male, what should you do about it? This was the fundamental problem. This is what that's what the first report stated. The second report, we'll put that aside. And so even now, we need new safe environment programs that address the truth, that address why is an adult male homosexually attracted to an adolescent male. We've got to put that on the table. People need to hear about that. Bishops in their dioceses and religious communities need conferences to understand what are the psychological dynamics. There are specific conflicts that make an adult male attracted to an adolescent male. Poor body image, loneliness during your adolescence, major unresolved anger from your adolescent period of life. And so I'm turning to Father John Harvey now and asking for his prayers. Move the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to deal with the truth. Don't cover up the truth anymore. Let's deal with the truth about homosexuality and address it and move to resolve it. One thing I want to say about courage, another thing about courage is really tremendous, are these sports camps. We talk about young men having the sports wound, the wound from not being accepted through sports. And I think the camps that Courage has now have been phenomenal in helping men have a much greater freedom in terms of their being comfortable with themselves. Because the problem, one of the major problems in this culture is this total idolatry of sports. And we gave conferences to the priests in Kansas City, Kansas last month. Father Chek and Steve, great witness yesterday, Jim, thank you. And at both those meetings, Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, priests came up to me and said, what are we going to do about these traveling sports teams every weekend? You know? It's like sports idolatry. So if you have a family and one of the boys is creatively gifted, artistically gifted, but not into sports, the trauma that he has from this is unbelievable. So I just want to ask the priests here just to consider possibly preaching on the idolatry of sports, that because the view of masculinity the culture has differs totally from the view of masculinity that the church has, and it's been in Western civilization. I mean, the culture says masculinity is determined when you're little by your athletic ability. Then it's determined by your body image. Okay, you got to have muscles. Then it's determined by your sexual activity. You better be acting out, or you're not really a man. Okay, but the church's view is radically different. Masculinity is based upon growing in virtue, virtus, strength. So the true man is a man who becomes strong through virtue, not through sports, not through muscles, but through growing in virtues. And what's the goal of that? Well, the goal of that is to become another Christ, right? And then ipse Christus, Christ himself. So radically different views. So we need fathers to convey this truth. The problem is that with the contraceptive era, we've moved from the 5-child Catholic family to the 2-child Catholic family. Well, what does that mean? That means that fathers have given in to selfishness. The fathers lack the generosity they once had. I was speaking to the seminarians in a seminary in the West, and I said about self-giving. And the rector of the seminary said before I went in, I went through a whole list of conflicts in self-giving that we have on our website, maritalhealing.com, and the virtues that can overcome those conflicts. And the rector of the seminary said to me, Rick, I want you to focus in on selfishness. I want you to focus in on their being aware they have to fight against selfishness. I said, fair enough, Monsignor, because when I drive home at night, every night, it's one of the major things I pray. Lord, help me when I go home to my wife and my children not to be selfish. Help me fight against selfishness. Because as the Pope has said, it has a gravitational force, on all of us. It influences all of us in this culture that we're in today. So to these seminarians, I made the comment to them, I said, I'm sorry I have to tell you this, and I would rather not tell you this, but I have to tell you this, that any of you that came from families where your fathers only had 2 children, that you have modeled after a father who deviated from the traditional role of a Catholic father, if it was deliberate, okay? Your father lacked generosity in his self-giving, okay? And the danger is, in your future, if you move on to priesthood, that you unconsciously will repeat that. And you can't repeat that. You cannot repeat that. We've had enough narcissism in the sacrament of marriage. We've had enough narcissism in the sacrament of holy orders now for 40 years. It needs to be purified. In both sacraments, it needs to be purified. And that's the reality. So we need to look at ourselves. We need to fight against this weakness. And because this is the major weakness in self-giving, is selfishness. Because selfishness takes us and it turns us in. And we're all hardwired in the image of God not to be turned in. We're hardwired to be giving, not to be turned in. Giving and then receiving. Well, okay, so I'm going to pause. And we have on our website, maritalhealing.com, and we just created a marital channel, youtube.com/maritalhealing, a lot of video on identifying various weaknesses in self-giving, anger, selfishness, controlling tendencies, and we welcome you to look at them. And again, it's been I feel myself completely renewed being here. Coming here wiped out, these battles, marriages, everything else, keep remembering it's God's battle, not mine. And so, Father Harvey, thank you for all your blessings to us and help us all here. Thank you. So, any thoughts or... I always believe, it took me a long time to accept this, but unless I get some criticism in speaking, I feel I'm not really doing God's will. So.
My name is Jean. I have a couple of thoughts. One, when I went through the Virtues program in Bridgeport Diocese, my main concern was that they focused totally on pedophilia, and I didn't feel that that was the issue at hand. And so I said, this training is useless to me because the problem is not pedophilia. It's 5% pedophilia. It's 95% homosexuality, which leads me to my next question.
No, you're totally right. Did you say that?
I did.
Oh.
And they didn't like me to be quiet and sit in the corner. But my next question is, I'm a little confused about your criticism of the John Jay report, and I think it's because you're saying homosexuality is the symptom, but not the problem. But because it seemed to me that John Jay report said that it was homosexuality, and okay.
Well, here's the person who was quoted. I forgot her name offhand, but her qualifications, her professional title, data analyst. So the data analyst, okay, as we're at the Conference of Bishops, Bishop Corteleone from Oakland, who's on the board of Courage, stood up and said, he weren't really questions, he was making statements. They said the behaviors were homosexual, but the persons were not. Now, that person, who made that statement? A data analyst made that statement. Please, a data analyst, you're quoting a data analyst about, so the behaviors, the problem was homosexual behavior. You're right, homosexuality is a symptom, just like substance abuse is a symptom, or gambling, or various addictions are symptoms of an underlying problem. That's what needs to be presented in safe environment programs. The causes of the compulsive behaviors need to be presented.
Okay, my third comment is that I'm hearing a lot about the father relationship, which I do agree is important, but I think my sister would agree with me. We feel the mother is important because many children, particularly ourselves, viewed our father through our mother's eyes. And we frequently have said, we had a love affair with our father through our mother's eyes. Anything difficult about him, she explained to us, he's had a hard day, or it's this, and we saw her love of him, and therefore we loved him. So I feel like, okay, there can be issues with fathers or with mothers, but also it's the way the parents interact with each other and support each other that can make a difference in a difficult father.
Oh, totally. So, I mean, in the past, the psychoanalytic view was, and we don't see this very often, domineering, controlling mother. Okay, but if there is a controlling mother in the home, if we don't all fight against the tendency to control that we all have because of original sin, if we don't fight against that, then we don't treat our spouse with respect. Okay, so that's the major virtue that overcomes the controlling tendency. So if a wife doesn't treat her husband with respect, it definitely wounds the father-son relationship, and the son perceives the father as weak. Okay? Then we model after our fathers, right? So then we feel weak in our masculinity because we saw our fathers not being strong enough to do. So it's very, very important that marital healing and strengthening marriage is extremely important. Ephesians 5, that we need to be respectful of our spouses. It's extremely important in our communication, because if we're not, you're right, those can be the conditions in a home that can make a male vulnerable to feel weak in his math. Now, whether it would lead to homosexuality, I think that depends on other factors also. If he's a good athlete, it's not going to lead to homosexuality, unless the father is extremely, extremely weak. Most men we work with who had controlling mothers are the angriest married men we treat. Okay? The only ones that are angrier are those who had abusive fathers. And they're furious because their father didn't stand up to them. They saw their fathers not being manly.
The Archdiocese, I mean, is a good diocese, but they don't really have anything going on. I don't think the priests should have very much awareness of these kind of issues at all in terms of same-sex attraction. I'm a clinical psychologist in Omaha. How would you recommend my somehow bringing this, like I'd love to do something like that, like give a workshop that priests were required to go under penalty of death or something.
Oh yeah, you got to give me your card later.
Got it. But anyway, I'd love to hear about that.
So I think, Father Chuck, I think inviting courage in. I think suggesting that courage be invited into the diocese, and that courage has a wonderful program that we did in Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri last month. First, the witness, Steve, or like Jim yesterday. Second, the mental health professional, and third, Father Chuck. I think it's an extremely effective program. So I recommend that. Then I'd recommend acquiring the Catholic Medical Association's Homosexuality and Hope and have that sent to all the priests of the archdiocese if the bishop would be willing to do that.
I have spent a lot of time right now. I'm from Minnesota, and as many of you might know, it's going to be on the ballot in Minnesota come 2012. That marriage will be defined as one man, one woman. And I do a lot of talking to legislators and stuff like that. A little bit of time on YouTube, contradicting some of the claims and stuff. Is there any bibliography out there that has some of the references to some of the material you're talking about? Because I've found it very difficult to find. I know it's out there. And the argument that I'm making is that the countries where you see this happening, the condition of the homosexual person or the person who struggles with this issue is not improving but getting worse. The suicide rates are going up. The STD rates are going up. In Minnesota alone, STD rates of people in their 20s going up by 13%, I think, annually. And this is in spite of what's being taught in the schools and in the sex curriculums. Is there a bibliography that I can consult to get some of these resources to tell the legislators and tell people? And I just want to say this publicly to everybody in this room. No one else is saying this, so everybody here has to do this.
You're right. You're telling everyone has to do this. We have to defend the sacrament of marriage. We have to defend that. Thank you. I would recommend narth.com, then the Witherspoon Institute at Princeton, the website Public Discourse. A lot of scholars write in. Maggie Gallagher at the Ave Maria University. These are some people I would contact in terms of, and then we've got people, and then we have a problem again getting psychologists. We need academic psychologists or psychiatrists who are willing to put their head on the line, and they will be putting their head on the line.
We were discussing at breakfast, and it seems like a lot of us who struggle with same-sex attraction suffer from either male or female insufficiency because we have this caricature of what it means to be a man or a woman in our heads, and we don't measure up, so we don't even try or we give up or whatever. And you mentioned in your talk that the prevalence in America of this idolatry of sports and this strength and having to fight and all this stuff. How do we get past those caricatures and get to the true masculinity, to defeat that deeply ingrained image in our heads?
This is interesting. A seminarian with transitory same-sex attraction said to me recently, he said to me, he didn't play sports, his father was distant, his older brother was difficult with him. He said to me recently, I've been praying about this, going in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and asking God to show me what masculinity is. Show me, Lord, what is masculinity? How do you view masculinity? And he said to me, I've come to appreciate more and more that what makes me a man was not how my father treated me, not my ability to play sports, not my brother, not my male friendships. My masculinity is primarily determined by the degree to which I conform myself to Jesus Christ, Amen. The true man. One other thing. I do think, this is one thing I mentioned about courage meetings. So meditation has been found to be very beneficial in cardiovascular diseases, a number of other diseases used up at Mass General. And I wonder about this in courage meetings, the possibility of a reflection, a brief meditation. If there wasn't an attachment to the father, St. Joseph as another father. If there was an attachment to a mother or a controlling mother, Our Lady as the gentle mother. If there was an attachment to a brother or male friends, the Lord as one friend and brother, and going over grade school, middle school, high school. So many males we work with who were bullied, who were rejected because they weren't good in sports, they drive back to the elementary school they went to, or they do it in their mind, okay? The gym, and they picture themselves there, and they picture the bullies here, they're here, and the Lord is here. And they grow in a sense of the Lord as the Redeemer of mankind, the Lord being there with them, to strengthen them and to free them from the pain of rejection they had with their peers. And over time, what happens is, with these males, is that they feel a greater fullness in their masculinity. They feel freer and freer in their masculinity.
You've done a great job contrasting the church's view of masculinity against the culture's view. Could you do the same thing, please, for femininity?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it's somewhat similar, I think, very similar. Because sports is becoming more and more a measure of femininity today. And so for femininity, I think it's not so much the athletic ability, but similar. It's like a pagan view of masculinity and femininity, where the body becomes critically important. And of course then with feminism, this has been a real problem with feminism in terms of mistrust of men. And I'm more skilled in masculinity. Maybe you could write an article about that. Father.
Doctor, we know that one of the main problems with contraception is the lack of communication between spouses and how they become more distant and less interactive in their lives. I was wondering if you might be able to say a few words relative to maybe that being intergenerational, maybe tying into the idea of lack of male bonding. I've heard bits and pieces in the realm of moral theology that maybe this contraceptive mentality would be intergenerational, and it would cut down on communication, say, between fathers and sons, and leading to such unfortunate manifestations as classroom sex ed, supposedly to...
I think there's no question that the contraceptive era has profoundly wounded masculinity and femininity. The men are living according to their, and women according to their fundamental natures, their calling as males and females. There's that old adage that the use of hormonal contraceptives feminizes men and masculinizes women. And I think there's some truth in that, because we've seen a number of cases of marital infidelity. The men unfaithful to their wives, they only had 2 children, and the men were unfulfilled in their masculinity. They were meant for more than 2 children. They were meant to sacrifice themselves more. And because it's faith that as men that really makes us strong. That's what that seminary was getting to. That's fundamentally what makes us strong. All of us men want to be strong, because we're called to be protectors, trustworthy. And the major issue, the virtue that makes us strong is our faith. But I think this issue of contraception has wreaked havoc in the sacrament of marriage and the sacrament of holy orders over the past 40 years. And that we really need a major purification in that area in order to free masculinity and truly free femininity.
Can you talk about, I was reading an article about estrogen in our water system and just lower sperm count in men over the last 15 years, and just getting back to even men being born with slightly more feminine features.
That's scary. That's scary. I'm not that knowledgeable about it. I just read several brief bulletins about it, but I'm not that familiar with it, but it's troubling. It's very, very troubling. Another toxic effect of the contraceptive mentality.
How many patients, how many patients do you have that might have gone through trauma? My son had brain cancer at 5 years old, and he had a very loving father. I used to say he was like Joseph, he was very humble, and he helped him, bake, and he was doing things around the house, and he learned a lot of that stuff. But after that happened, got rejection, couldn't do a lot of things from girls and teachers because he was shorter, he had a scar back, and he couldn't communicate in a nonverbal learning disability. So now he's been on for 3 years, but it seems like the friend is not in a relationship, but he tried a couple of times, but it doesn't communicate very well, and he's very fussy. But he wants that friendship so bad that he's willing to just say, no, I'm going this way, these are my friends. And we don't know how to approach it without pushing them away. And how many patients maybe you have that, how would you have dealt with that?
Well, loneliness for male friendships is one of the major issues that we address. And many like teenagers will come in and say, Doc, I know I was born this way, or college students. One of the first questions we ask them, well, not one of the first, but early on is, well, could you tell me the name of your male friends in elementary school? And many of them can't tell you anyone. I mean, truly a male friend, So this male friendship, so an approach we take is, look, this wound, the lifestyle is a painful lifestyle. It's not a gay lifestyle. And could you consider, I remember young people say to us, okay, Doc, what can you do for me? Okay, what's your treatment approach? Take the history and then come up with a plan. But there would be, you have an emptiness for male friendships. You have a bad wound. You have the cross at a young age. We don't know why. You've had the cross at a very young age. And so friendship with Christ is something, this is one of the great gifts of courage, great blessings of courage. Friendship with Christ. Friendship with Christ fills up, look, Every one of us who are married, every one of us brings into our marriages a certain loneliness. None of us have a perfect father. None of us have a perfect mother. We all have a certain loneliness we bring into our marriages. You know, with the sacrament of holy orders in friendship with Christ, the grace of sacraments, fills that up, fills up that void so we don't get in trouble. Yeah, I think praying for him, going to the Lord as his best friend and hoping that, because what we find is if the friendship with the Lord deepens, and often does deepen through courage, then same-sex attractions go away. I want to end with one final anecdote. Tonight, I have to leave right after this talk. My email address, if any of you want other thoughts, my email address is r.like.richard, r82488 at AOL.com, r82488 at AOL.com. But I'm going to have dinner with two friends. We usually go to see a Shakespeare play at the college where Father Harvey lived, the Sales University. We drive right by the community that he lived in. And my friend said to me he was a delayed vocation. He was ordained a Benedictine at age 57. And he said when Father Harvey taught us moral theology at Catholic, one of the schools of theology in Washington, he said we called him the Irish elf. They just delighted him. Well, thank you very much.